On the distant planet of Thalrith, a world that sparkled with advanced technology and ruled by an aristocratic race, the royal family was admired and respected by every being in the galaxy. The planet's people were known for their power, their intelligence, and their unmatched beauty. At the center of it all stood Princess Terrana, the embodiment of grace and royalty. Her beauty was legendary, her intellect sharp, and her arrogance well unmatched. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed her race was the superior one in every way. It was a belief she had been raised with, and one that made her unapproachable to most. Terrana had never known anything other than admiration from those around her. Everywhere she went, people bowed before her, seeking her approval or hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who could command entire fleets with just a word. But despite all the praise, there was one thing that Terrana couldn't shake. She felt completely alone. No one ever seemed to see her for who she really was. They saw the princess, the daughter of the king, but not the young woman beneath the crown. And then there was Earth. Her mission on this tiny, distant planet was a diplomatic one, aimed at improving relations between Thalrith and the people of Earth. Terrana was told that this was important for her people's future, but she found herself unimpressed with what she had seen so far. The humans were primitive in comparison to the advanced civilization of Thalrith. The technology was rudimentary, their buildings clunky and inefficient. The humans were no threat to her, and she had no interest in making friends with them. They were just a small part of the galaxy that had little to offer. What Terrana had not anticipated was Marcus. Marcus was just a simple human. He was assigned as her personal bodyguard during her stay on Earth. While he stood tall with broad shoulders and a face that appeared hard at first glance, it was his quiet demeanor that set him apart from the others. He was unremarkable in most ways. He wasn't loud, nor did he seek attention like some of the other guards. He did his job with diligence but always kept to the background, never drawing the spotlight toward himself. At first, Terrana had dismissed him completely. He was, after all, just another human to her. But there was something about his calm presence that intrigued her. While other humans fawned over her, trying to impress her, Marcus merely did his job with quiet efficiency. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then his words were measured, thoughtful. It was this silence, this calm, that caught Terrana's attention. She had expected him to be like all the other human servants, eager to please, constantly trying to win her favor. But Marcus seemed different. He did his job without complaint, without trying to win her approval. In fact, he often acted as if he was barely aware of her presence, something that only made her more curious. One evening, as she sat on the balcony of her lavish quarters, gazing out at the human city below, she found herself wondering why she had even come to Earth in the first place. It seemed so insignificant compared to the grandeur of Thalrith. Her eyes glanced over at Marcus, who stood by the door, always at attention, his expression unreadable. "Do you ever wonder why we're here?" Terrana asked, her voice low but curious. Marcus didn't immediately respond. He was trained not to engage in conversation unless necessary, but the question had caught him off guard. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "I think you've come to represent your people, Princess, to ensure peace. That's all I know." His answer was as simple as the man himself. Terrana's brow furrowed as she studied him, noting the way his eyes never met hers, how he remained distant even in the quiet moments when it would have been so easy to say something to get her attention. For some reason, that intrigued her. The next few days were filled with more of the same. Diplomatic meetings, tour, and the constant reminder that Earth was still so far beneath her station. And yet, every time Terrana glanced at Marcus, she found herself growing more curious. He never seemed to look at her the way others did, like she was some kind of goddess to be admired. Instead, he looked at her as if she was just another person, a person who didn't deserve the pedestal that others had placed her on. She had always been praised for her beauty and power, but it was in those fleeting moments when she saw Marcus that she began to wonder. Did he not care? Did he not see her as the great Princess A? One afternoon, the two of them found themselves alone in the royal chambers while Terrana prepared for an upcoming event. She had been pacing the room, lost in thought, when she suddenly stopped and looked at Marcus, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you think I'm different?" she asked, her voice softer now. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't his place to give his opinion, but there was something about her question that made him feel compelled to answer. "You're different from others, yes," he said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the floor. "But then again, everyone is different. You're no exception." Tarina studied him for a long moment, her sharp gaze never leaving his face. There was something about his words that cut deeper than she expected. He wasn't just saying that to please her. He was speaking honestly from a place of neutrality. That was something she wasn't used to. That evening, during the diplomatic dinner, Tarina found herself growing more and more irritated with the pomp and ceremony of it all. The humans fawned over her, offering praise, admiration, and gifts, but Tarina could barely hide her frustration. All she wanted was for one person to speak to her as if she were just another being, not a princess on a pedestal. As if on cue, her eyes found Marcus across the room. He stood at the back, his eyes scanning the room, vigilant as always. But there was something different about his expression tonight. His usual stoic gaze had softened ever so slightly. For a moment, their eyes met across the crowded room, and A felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. He was the only one who didn't treat her like royalty. He was the only one who didn't see her as untouchable. It made her wonder, could it be possible that he saw her for who she truly was, not just the princess but the person? As the night wore on, Tarina couldn't shake the thought of Marcus from her mind. There was something there, something between them that she couldn't ignore. She wasn't sure what it was yet, but she knew that it was more than just a fleeting curiosity. And perhaps for the first time in her life, that frightened her. The days after the dinner passed in a blur of events, but Tarina couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The thought of Marcus lingered in her mind, growing stronger with each passing day. She had never felt this way before, so unsure, so vulnerable. For as long as she could remember, she had been surrounded by adoring subjects, people who saw her as a powerful princess and nothing more. But Marcus saw her as something else, and that was something she couldn't ignore. The human guard had been different from the very first moment she had set eyes on him. He wasn't like the others who tried to gain her favor with flattery or gifts. He wasn't interested in her beauty or her status. He simply did his job and kept his distance. And yet, in his quiet, unassuming way, Marcus had made her feel like she was seen for who she really was, not just the princess, but a woman who had her own doubts and insecurities. For days, Tarina tried to push these thoughts aside. She focused on her duties, the meetings, and the carefully planned diplomatic events. But no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, Marcus remained at the forefront of her mind. She couldn't help but wonder why he acted the way he did around her. Why did he seem so unaffected by her royal status? Why didn't he fawn over her like everyone else? As Tarina sat alone in her quarters one evening, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Marcus, as always, standing tall with a calm expression on his face. "Princess," he said in his usual quiet tone, "it's time for your evening patrol. I'll escort you to the gathering hall." Tarina nodded, her mind still swirling with thoughts of the day. She stood from her chair and walked toward the door, her gaze meeting his for a brief moment. There was that feeling again, that strange connection that seemed to pull her toward him. She shook her head, dismissing the thought. Now was not the time to dwell on it. They walked through the palace corridors in silence, the only sound being the soft echo of their footsteps. Tarina couldn't help but notice how calm and composed Marcus always seemed. He never rushed, never seemed distracted, and never made her feel like she was anything more than just another person in the room. It was a feeling she had grown to appreciate more than she had expected. When they arrived at the gathering hall, a few diplomats and leaders from Earth were already there, chatting amongst themselves. As Tarina entered the room, everyone turned to greet her, as expected. They showered her with compliments and offered her extravagant gifts, each one trying to outdo the other in a show of respect. But for the first time, A felt disconnected from it all. The grand speeches, the lavish presents, none of it mattered. She couldn't stop thinking about Marcus. Her eyes scanned the room, and she found him standing at the back, his eyes alert but calm. As usual, he didn't seem to care for the attention others were giving her. He stood quietly as though he were waiting for something, but Tarina wasn't sure what. She excused herself from the crowd, feeling a strange need to be away from the endless praise and admiration. She walked toward Marcus, who straightened when he saw her approach. "Princess," he said, his voice steady. Tarina stopped in front of him, her eyes studying him for a moment. "Why do you never treat me like the others do?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "Why do you act so indifferent?" Marcus didn't flinch. He met her gaze with his usual calm. "I don't see you as others do," he replied quietly. I see you as a person, princess, not just a title. Tarana was taken aback by his words. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. People either feared her or admired her, but Marcus didn't seem to feel either of those things. There was no awe in his eyes, no fear. There was only a quiet respect and something else, something she couldn't quite name. I'm not used to that, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Marcus tilted his head slightly, as though he were considering her words. I imagine not, but sometimes the people who see us most clearly are the ones who don't look up to us. Tarana stood in silence, taking in his words. It was true, she had spent so many years surrounded by people who only saw her for her title, for her status. But Marcus didn't see her as just a princess. He saw her as a person, someone with flaws and doubts. And it was strangely comforting. For the rest of the evening, Tarana couldn't help but notice how often her eyes would drift to Marcus. She tried to shake the feeling, but it was always there, just beneath the surface. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just a passing curiosity. There was something deeper, something more meaningful that was pulling her toward him. The next day, Tarana found herself seeking out Marcus more and more. She would catch glimpses of him in the halls, and without even thinking, she would walk toward him. He was always polite, always respectful, but never overly familiar. It was a balance that both puzzled and intrigued her. One afternoon, as Tarana was walking through the palace gardens, she noticed Marcus standing by the fountain, his back to her. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she should approach him, but something inside her urged her to do so. Slowly, she walked up to him. Marcus, she said, her voice gentle. He turned to face her, his eyes flickering with a hint of surprise. Princess. There was an awkward silence between them. A shifted on her feet, feeling uncertain. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice soft. For the other night, for speaking to me as if I'm just another person. Marcus gave her a small nod, but there was no hint of a smile on his face. You don't need to thank me, princess. It's the least I can do. A felt a strange pang in her chest. She wasn't used to people not wanting something from her, and yet Marcus didn't seem to care about her status or her title. He only cared about who she was as a person. I've been thinking, she said slowly. Maybe you're right, maybe. Maybe I've spent so much time focused on being a princess that I've forgotten how to just be. Me. Marcus nodded, though he said nothing. A could sense that he wasn't just offering empty words of comfort. He understood what she was feeling, because he didn't look at her as a princess, but as someone who was struggling to find herself. In the days that followed, Tarana found herself spending more time with Marcus, though she tried to keep their interactions subtle. There was no need for anyone to know about their conversations. She didn't want to risk the gossip, the rumors that would inevitably follow if anyone discovered that the proud and powerful princess, A, was spending time with a human guard. But in those quiet moments, away from the eyes of the world, Tarana found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. She found a connection with someone who didn't care about her royal title, who didn't fear her power or admire her beauty. Marcus treated her like a person, plain and simple, and for once, Tarana realized that was exactly what she needed. Her thoughts, however, were interrupted one evening when a sudden commotion erupted outside the palace. The sound of shouting and rushing footsteps reached her ears, and without thinking, Tarana stood from her seat, her heart racing. Princess! Marcus's voice rang through the hallway, his footsteps pounding as he approached. Stay inside, it's not safe. Tarana's eyes widened. What's happening? We're under attack, Marcus said, his voice hard with urgency. We need to get you to safety. Before she could respond, Marcus was already at her side, leading her through the palace halls with practiced speed. Tarana's mind raced as they moved quickly, the sounds of chaos growing louder. She had always been prepared for the idea of political intrigue, but this was something she hadn't expected. As they reached the safe room, Marcus turned to face her, his expression calm despite the tension in the air. Stay here, he said firmly. I'll keep you safe. Tarana looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she didn't see him as just a guard, as just someone doing his job. She saw him as someone who would risk his life for hers, someone who cared about her safety. Marcus, she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. Thank you. He gave her a brief nod. It's my duty, princess, but you're not alone. I'll make sure you're safe. As he stepped out to face the danger, A felt something stir inside her. It was a feeling she couldn't ignore. A feeling that, despite the chaos around her, something was beginning to change. not just in her world, but in her heart as well. The chaos outside the safe room was unlike anything Tarina had ever experienced. The loud sounds of the explosion and distant screams filled the air, each one sending a chill down her spine. She had always lived a life of luxury and privilege, surrounded by walls of security and protection, never truly having to face danger. But now she was here, locked inside a room with only Marcus to keep her safe, her whole world suddenly uncertain. The realization hit her like a wave. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was a person, vulnerable and afraid, in need of someone to protect her. The feeling unsettled her. For so long she had believed she was invincible, untouchable. But in this moment she was as fragile as anyone else, and it terrified her. Marcus had told her to stay inside, and she did, at least for the moment. She could hear him moving outside, his footsteps steady and determined, and it was clear that he was taking charge. Despite the threat that loomed, he didn't seem afraid. He was calm, efficient, focused. And for the first time in her life, Tarina wasn't sure if she could truly understand the courage it took to face danger with such composure. She had never been forced to act in such a way. As the hours passed, the sounds of fighting outside slowly quieted. Tarina stood by the door, listening intently. Her thoughts were a mix of worry for Marcus and confusion about what was happening. Who could possibly want to harm her or her people? Was it a rogue faction from another planet, or was it something more? There were so many questions, but none of them had answers yet. She turned to the small window in the safe room. The sky was dark and the palace grounds were now quiet, as if the battle had never occurred. But she knew better. It was only a brief lull in the storm. She wasn't safe here. None of them were. There were still so many unknowns. Just as the thought crossed her mind, the door opened and Marcus stepped in, his expression unreadable. He was covered in dust, his uniform slightly torn but otherwise unharmed. His calm demeanor never wavered as he stepped inside the room and closed the door behind him. "Princess," he said, his voice low and steady, "it's over. The attackers have been neutralized." Tarina looked at him, her eyes wide with relief. "But how? Who were they?" "We don't know yet," Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. "But I suspect they were mercenaries. Someone wants to destabilize the peace talks between our worlds. They knew where to strike and they struck quickly." Tarina's heart raced at the realization. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Someone wanted her and the fragile peace between Thalrith and Earth to fail. She had always known there would be opposition to her mission here, but this attack felt personal. It was a message, and she had no idea who was sending it. "How did you know how to protect me?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Marcus gave her a brief, almost imperceptible smile. "I was trained for situations like this. I've been in combat before. It's my job to keep you safe, no matter the cost." A stared at him, her thoughts a whirlwind. She had always seen him as just a bodyguard, someone who had been assigned to her, someone who was there out of duty. But now she realized there was so much more to him. He wasn't just doing his job. He was protecting her because he cared, and the thought brought something unexpected to her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time: gratitude. "You've been incredible, Marcus," she said quietly, her voice softer than before. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Marcus shook his head, looking away. "It's not about me, Princess. It's about your safety. You're the one who's important." A felt a sudden surge of emotion, a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. It was a mixture of relief and something else, something deeper. She wanted to tell him that she appreciated him more than words could express, but for some reason the words wouldn't come. She just stood there, her eyes fixed on him, silently thankful that he was there with her. They stood in silence for a few moments, the weight of the situation hanging between them. A felt something shift in the air, a tension that had been building between them for days. It was the tension of two people who had been drawn together by circumstance, by the need to survive, but who had also begun to see each other in a new light. "Marcus," A finally spoke, her voice shaky, I don't know what to do. I've never been in a situation like this before." "You don't have to know everything," Marcus said, his voice gentle yet firm. "You just have to trust yourself and the people around you. We'll figure this out together." His words were calm and steady, but Tarina felt the sincerity behind them. She could trust him. He had proven that to her already. And for the first time in a long time, A felt a sense of relief wash over her. She wasn't alone in this. As the silence stretched between them, Tarina's mind raced with thoughts of what came next. The attack had been a wake-up call. It wasn't just about the peace talks anymore. It was about survival. Someone had tried to kill her to stop the progress she had worked so hard to build. But who? And why? Do you think they'll come back? Tarina asked, her voice a bit stronger now. Marcus's expression hardened. I don't know, but I'll make sure you're ready if they do. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus gave her a short nod. I'll make sure you're safe, you have my word. A felt a wave of gratitude towards him, but there was something else stirring inside her, something she couldn't ignore anymore. She wanted to be more than just the princess under his protection. She wanted to be someone he could trust, someone he could rely on just as much as she had come to rely on him. The next few days were filled with questions and uncertainties. Marcus kept a close watch on Tarina, always by her side, as they continued to navigate the aftermath of the attack. The palace was on high alert, and Tarina was briefed on the progress of the investigation into the mercenaries. But despite the ongoing investigation, Tarina couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. And it wasn't just the guards or the diplomats, it was something deeper, something more personal. As the days passed, the distance between her and Marcus seemed to close. They spoke more, and Tarina found herself seeking his company. The connection between them was undeniable. She began to see him not just as a bodyguard, but as someone who had become integral to her life. His presence was a comfort in the midst of all the chaos. One evening, as Tarina sat in her chambers looking out at the stars, she felt a gentle knock at the door. It was Marcus. "Princess," he said, stepping inside. "I've been instructed to take you to the command center. We need to discuss the next steps." Tarina nodded and stood from her chair, walking toward him. As she did, their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the world had quieted around them, leaving just the two of them standing in that moment, sharing something unspoken. Tarina felt a warmth rise in her chest, a feeling that she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just gratitude or relief anymore. It was something deeper, something that, for the first time, she couldn't ignore. "Marcus," she said, her voice soft, "thank you." He gave her a brief, almost imperceptible smile. "It's my duty, princess." But in his eyes, she saw something more. She saw the man behind the guard, the person who had risked everything to protect her. She saw someone she could trust, someone who had become more than just a bodyguard. And in that moment, Tarina realized something she had known all along but had never allowed herself to fully understand. She wasn't just falling for him. She had already fallen. And the thought of it shook her to her core. The weeks that followed the attack on the palace were filled with tension, uncertainty, and danger. Every day, the threat of further violence hung over the palace like a dark cloud, and Tarina was forced to adapt to a new reality. Gone were the carefree days of her diplomatic mission, the time she had once thought would be full of simple tasks and peaceful discussions. Now, every moment was filled with strategy meetings, security checks, and the looming question of who was behind the attack. Tarina found herself leaning more and more on Marcus as the days went by. He had proven himself to be not just a capable protector, but a quiet strength in the midst of chaos. His calm presence brought a sense of reassurance that no one else could provide. Whether he was walking beside her in the hallways, helping her make decisions, or simply standing watch outside her chambers, Marcus had become someone she couldn't imagine facing this world without. Yet despite the bond they were forming, Tarina couldn't ignore the complexity of their situation. She was the princess, the future ruler of Thalrith, and he was just a human guard. Their worlds were vastly different, and she knew the reality of their relationship was filled with impossible obstacles. She had responsibilities to her people, to her family, and to her royal bloodline. Her duty was clear, but the feelings she was beginning to have for Marcus made that duty feel heavier than ever before. One afternoon, Tarina sat by the window in her private chambers, looking out at the palace grounds below. The peaceful landscape did little to ease her troubled mind. The peace talks between Thalrith and Earth were on the verge of collapse, with every passing day bringing more pressure from both sides. Even with the recent attack behind them, there was a constant fear that another would come. And through it all, she couldn't escape the thought of Marcus. The door opened softly and Marcus stepped inside. His presence was always comforting, but today, Tarina felt the weight of their unspoken bond more than ever before. She turned to face him as he approached. "Princess," Marcus said quietly, his voice as steady as always. "The latest reports are in. The negotiations are becoming more complicated. The Earth representatives are demanding more from Thalrith, and tensions are rising." Tarana nodded, feeling the familiar knot of frustration tightening in her chest. The talks were supposed to be a bridge to peace, a way to unite the planets, but they seemed to be unraveling before her eyes. It felt as if no one understood the stakes. Her people's future, Earth's future, was all hanging by a thread. "I know," she replied softly. "It's as if no one sees the bigger picture. It's not just about land or resources, it's about unity. We have to find a way to make them understand that." Marcus studied her for a moment, as if considering her words. "You've done more than enough, Princess. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, things are out of our control." Tarana looked at him, her eyes meeting his with a sense of vulnerability she wasn't used to showing. "But it's my responsibility. My people are counting on me. I can't let them down." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes softening. "You're doing the best you can, and no matter what happens, you're not alone. You have people who care about you, people who will stand by you." Tarana's heart raced as his words settled in her mind. She had always been surrounded by those who admired her, but she had never felt like anyone truly saw her. Not like Marcus did. He was the one person who saw her as something more than a title, more than a princess. He saw her as herself, as a person who was just trying to do what was right. "I don't want to fail," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You won't fail," Marcus replied, his tone unwavering. "Not as long as you keep fighting. And I'll be here to fight alongside you, no matter what." A felt a wave of warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. It wasn't just about the peace talks or the political maneuvering. It was about knowing that there was someone she could rely on no matter what. And for the first time since she arrived on Earth, A felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't as impossible as it seemed. As the days passed, the pressure continued to mount. The diplomats on both sides grew more aggressive, and the media began to pick up on the growing tensions. But through it all, Marcus remained by Tarana's side. He was always there, always ready to support her when she needed it. And as they spent more time together, Tarana found herself growing more and more attached to him. What had started as admiration for his strength and determination had turned into something deeper. She couldn't deny it any longer. She had feelings for him. Strong, overwhelming feelings that she didn't know how to navigate. One evening, after another long day of meetings and discussions, Tarana found herself standing on the balcony of her quarters, staring out at the stars. It had become a routine for her to seek solace in the night sky. The stars had always been a symbol of hope to her, a reminder that there was a bigger world beyond the palace walls, a world filled with possibilities. Marcus appeared beside her, his presence as steady as ever. "You're up late," he said, his voice low and calming. A smiled faintly, glancing at him. "I couldn't sleep. There's too much on my mind." Marcus nodded, understanding. "I know the feeling, but you've done everything you can. The rest is beyond your control." Tarana sighed, feeling the weight of his words. She had done everything she could to make the peace talks work. She had fought for unity, for a better future, but it still felt like it wasn't enough. There were forces at play that she couldn't control, and that frightened her. She turned to look at Marcus, her heart pounding in her chest. "Do you ever feel like we're just not meant for this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like we're just playing a part in someone else's story?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step closer to her, his eyes locking onto hers. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I do know that you're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Tarana felt her breath catch in her throat. His words, his presence, it was all so overwhelming. She had spent her whole life building walls around herself, keeping people at a distance, never allowing herself to be vulnerable. But now, with Marcus, she didn't want to hide anymore. She wanted to be real, to let him see the side of her that no one else had ever seen. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Marcus," she said softly, her heart racing. Marcus looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "You'll never have to find out." And then, without thinking, Tarana reached out and placed her hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but in that moment it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Marcus didn't pull away. Instead, he gently squeezed her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. For a few moments they stood there in silence, the weight of the world still heavy on their shoulders, but somehow it didn't matter. They had each other, and that was enough. But even as Tarana felt a sense of peace wash over her, she knew that the road ahead would be difficult. The peace talks were far from over, and the danger was still very real. There were forces at work that she couldn't control. But for the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. She had Marcus by her side, and with him she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could overcome whatever came next. As the days passed, Tarina found herself more and more consumed by her feelings for Marcus. She couldn't deny the connection between them any longer. It was real, and though she knew the consequences of their relationship could be disastrous for her position, for her future, she couldn't bring herself to pull away from him. Not when he made her feel seen, understood, and cared for in a way no one else had. But the danger wasn't over yet. There were still enemies who wanted to tear apart the fragile peace between Thalrith and Earth. And Tarina knew that no matter how strong their bond was, they would need more than just their feelings for each other to survive the storm that was coming.